Developed by Arcane and published by Bethesda Softworks, Dishonored 2 is the 2016 sequel to the 2012 classic Dishonored. It has some of the absolute best level design in gaming, and the game feel is up there with Cyberpunk 2077 and Mirror's Edge. It's a must-play, for the gameplay, if not for the story. With a Metacritic score of 88 and a user score of 8.5, it's safe to say that Dishonored 2 was well received. The game is about 2.5 hours long according to how long to beat, though my playthrough came in at an hour less than that. I played the game for the first time back in 2017 and I managed a clean hands run. I seem to have gotten careless in old age, but I still did a low chaos playthrough for this video. I played the game on hard and I had a bit of a journey with it, but in the end I came to the conclusion that it is a masterpiece. I usually start off by discussing gameplay, but with Dishonored 2 I feel that starting with the story is more appropriate. Arcane made the decision to make Corvo's low chaos path through Dunwall 15 years prior to the events of the second game, the official story. The basic setup is this. Emily Kaldwin is the Empress and Corvo her royal protector. When Delilah comes to Dunwall and orchestrates a coup, Emily or Corvo, depending on which character you decide to play as, has to rescue the other and dismantle Delilah's power base in the southern city of Karnaca. Corvo's birthplace, the Jewel of the South Karnaca, is a beautiful city with the same vicious class divisions and wondrous whalepunk technology as Dunwall, and it's the primary setting for Dishonored 2. Luckily, the place is marvelously beautiful, well designed as a series of levels, and, crucially, a believable city, all at the same time. It's where all but the first and last missions are set, and just like Dunwall in the first game, it's the game's most important character. Dunwall was clearly modelled on London, with its Dunwall Bridge, Big Ben clone and Westminster Abbey-styled Dunwall Tower. Hell, just compare the map of Dunwall to a map of London. Karnaca is clearly inspired by Mediterranean architecture, but there's no clear giveaway like Dunwall has. Any given Karnaca alley could pass for Rome, Barcelona or Nice, but the city also has a strong South American influence. The prominent mountain in the background reminds me of Rio de Janeiro. There's that Latin American Golden Age impression the game leaves you with, the whalepunk equivalent of Buenos Aires in the 1890s. That colonial vibe carries on into the characters who inhabit Karnaca, as the conspiracy facing Emily is made up of both people with names like Luca Abel and Aramis Stilton. Speaking of the conspiracy, we have to discuss their plan. As the incredibly rushed opening shows, in the weeks and months leading up to the coup, Emily's enemies have been murdered by an assassin the press has dubbed the Crown Killer, due to the victims all being vocal critics of the Empress. From the writer's perspective, this is supposed to be the conspiracy laying the groundwork for the coup, and the eponymous dishonoring of Emily and Corvo, as they would be the natural suspects. For me though, it fails almost completely, but we'll get to that later on. For now, let's give a synopsis of the game's events to give context to the levels we play through, as that is the story's real purpose. After getting deposed by Delilah, the player escapes Dunwall to Karnaca on a ship called the Dreadful Whale, run by a woman named Megan Foster. Those who play the first game's DLC, The Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches, already know about Delilah. And as I said in my video on Dishonored, I don't like how the series pivoted after the main story of the first game to focus on the supernatural. Those who didn't play those DLC get to join Emily and Corvo in the quest to learn who Delilah is and how she put together the coup. Our first lead in Karnaca is the Addermeyer Institute, a hospital, as the Crown Killer was spotted heading there after kidnapping none other than Anton Sokolov, the legendary natural philosopher. The hospital itself is great, a small refuge of the grimy, on the brink of societal collapse tone that Dishonored 1 pulled off so successfully. We eventually find out that the main doctor at the institute, Alexandria Hypatia, is in a sort of Jekyll and Hyde situation where her version of Mr. Hyde is the Crown Killer. Instead of seizing the opportunity to explore our main character's dual and secret identities, the game has you either killing or curing Hypatia, and we learn that Sokolov is in the clutches of the game's patented natural philosopher, Kirin Jindosh. Jindosh lives in the Clockwork Mansion, one of the most impressive levels not just in Dishonored, not just in Arcane's game, but in gaming period. After rescuing Sokolov and killing or de-IQing Jindosh, we head out for our next target, the witch Brianna Ashworth. She's taken over the Royal Conservatory, and we get a great Victorian museum to explore. We kill or take Ashworth's magic away and head for Aramis Stilton's manor, where the conspirators held some sort of dark ritual. After the best level in the game, we go after the Duke Luca Abel himself, either to kill him or replace him with his body double, and while we are there, we steal a part of Delilah's soul. We go back to Dunwall to face Delilah, killing her, or once again, trapping her in the void. In short, the story plays out much like it did in the original, except that there is a new set of conspirators and a new city. The details often don't make sense, like why would Emily need an alter ego killer when she is the Empress? Either she has the power to silence dissent, or the fact that Delilah becomes the Empress doesn't matter as the title is largely ceremonial. It's not worth lingering on the details though. Dishonored 1's writing wasn't stellar either, but what makes that game work where this one doesn't is that Corvo's quest for vengeance was a mood piece. I know that not all the levels were set at night in the rain, but that's how I remember them because of the atmosphere the game had. Its world, its story, and its characters were designed to fit the moody and depressing tone the game was going for. The immoral choices you had to make between killing or getting rid of your targets in a more gruesome way fits perfectly in the world the first game set up. At one or two points, the writing embraces what made the original great in the second game, and we get lines like this.
I suppose the Duke doesn't care, as long as he sips from silver cups.
And what are the cups in Dunwall Tower made from, Empress?
But most of the time, the tone was left behind in Dunwall. In Karnaca, the sun is shining, there is no civilization-ending plague, and life just goes on like normal for the civilians on the street. The bloodflies are supposed to act as a stand-in for the rat plague, but no one ever seems to take them as an equally serious risk. Civilization isn't falling apart at the seams. Turbo malaria season is just extra bad this year. Of course, it's fine to have a change in tone between two games in the same franchise. Far Cry 2 and Far Cry 3 are both beloved games, despite having an incredible disparity in tone. It's just such a shame that Arcane didn't build on the great foundation they had in Dishonored, as the tone made up for all the narrative's shortcoming. Without that signature tone, Dishonored 2's story just feels bland. Any issues I have with the game are strictly narrative though. The gameplay is anything but bland. Moving Emily around feels like she has a body in a way that I have only ever experienced in Mirror's Edge. The controls are responsive, and the options are almost limitless. In a way, it is a real shame that the game presents itself mostly as a stealth game, because its immersive sim design gives combat an incredibly high skill ceiling. It's also just brimming with details and secrets for you to use, and it trusts you to figure them out for yourself. I talked in the Dishonored video about how attaching a mine to a bottle and throwing it creates a DIY grenade, which is made more useful now that there are non-lethal mines, and that you have to unlock non-lethal grenades. But you can also just throw a chloroform bottle to get the same effect. Emily's version of Blink, Far Reach, allows you to grab a surface and catapult yourself forward in addition to grabbing people and objects. You can throw grabbed guards, you can shoot your enemies in the legs to make them stumble, and you can combine all these techniques to wreak real stylish havoc. The mechanics of Dishonored 2 are rock solid, and it's worth doing high chaos on low difficulty just to experiment. The mechanics are greatly enhanced by the world-class level design. Not only does every level tell a story about the people who live and work in the places you explore, but they also give you great challenges, options, and replayability. I can't imagine how much work it must have been to map out how the Clockwork and Stilton mansions would work, and it's a miracle that those levels are so fun to play when they are so complex. The idea of having the black markets be in the levels themselves rather than at the hideout is great, and giving the player the option to rob them is inspired. It's easy to miss just how good levels like the Duke's Mansion and the Conservatory are, given just how great and attention-grabbing levels like the two mansions are, but all the levels in Karnaca are great. The worst level in the game is, in my view, the return to Dunwall Tower, but come on, we're grading on a scale here. Arcane makes immersive sims, and what makes Dishonored 2 such an incredibly good immersive sim is that so many mechanics have double functions, like carrying bodies can be used to conceal unconscious guards for the stealthy player, or can be thrown at enemies for the aggressive player. And the same glass which you could use to distract a guard can be thrown in that guard's face to create an opening. Dishonored 2, just like Dark Messiah, also creates combat scenarios where a straight up fight is a mugs game. If you're not building traps, throwing things, and otherwise fighting dirty, you're at a major disadvantage. That's the beauty of the game's combat. In addition to great stealth and incredible combat, the game also has a great puzzle, which I actually had to bust out Excel to solve, but it's completely optional. In short, Dishonored 2 has everything you would want in terms of gameplay. If you're a mechanics first type of player, you'll love this. It would shock me if the level design isn't taught in game design courses, and it has unparalleled game feel. Normally, here's where I'd talk about the game's themes, but I'm not really sure what Dishonored 2 is trying to say. The game wants to be less pessimistic than its predecessor, but it doesn't replace the edge with anything else. The game features some allusions to Victorian literature, like The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Dr. Hypatia. But the game's version misses the point of the original by having the Crown Killer being, for all intents and purposes, a separate person. The game sometimes almost comes off as using fantasy tropes, which really don't mesh well with the setting. Emily is the Empress by divine right and gets usurped by an evil aunt who proceeds to wreck the Empire. But all is set right when the rightful ruler assumes power again. This weirdness surrounding the monarchy is greatly exacerbated by the game's dynastic storytelling. Every important character either knows the other important characters, studied under Sokolov, or had a tragic backstory, prominently featuring an important character. Dishonored 2's world is a lot bigger than Dishonored 1's, but it feels so small when everyone is 3 degrees of separation from everyone else. Unlike Dishonored 1, 2 only got one piece of DLC, the expand-alone Death of the Outsider, where we follow Megan, aka Billy Lurk, as she embarks on a quest to kill the Black-Eyed Bastard on Dowd's command. The DLC is once again a marvel to play. Great levels, the bank heist map being the largest yet in a Dishonored game with some margin, but the writing once again leaves plenty to be desired. The setup is, in my view, incredible. Killing the Outsider is a cool idea, and I think the first game's model of having shorter DLC stories focus on the supernatural is a great idea, as it allows room to expand and build lore while also keeping some of the mystery surrounding the void. The main problem with Death of the Outsider is once again the writer's insistence on reusing characters. Why does Dowd want to kill the Outsider? Well, he is a badass and he was a protagonist for the last game's DLC. Just like Corvo's protege was the main character of the main game, his mirror Dowd's protege becomes the main character of the DLC no matter how little sense it makes. Maybe I misunderstood Dowd's story in The Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches, but I thought he had a great and thoroughly completed character arc. After killing the Empress, he feels remorse for the first time, but with some nudging by the Outsider, he manages to redeem himself for killing an Empress by saving an Empress. I find the ending strange as well. Billy either kills the Outsider or rescues him from the void, but the game is not willing to say what that means, which means the ending is a bit of a letdown. In spite of its flaws, I really enjoyed Death of the Outsider. It's more Dishonored 2 gameplay, and what more could you ask for? I watched videos by Yahtzee, Downward Thrust, IGN, Patrician TV, and BillytheCorgi to prepare for writing this video, and I found what was, for me, an unexpected consensus. People love Dishonored 2, and everyone agrees that it's weird that you can play as Corvo, as he has little to do with the second game's story. I wonder why Arcane didn't just make Corvo an unlock for completing the game to spice up replays. Downward Thrust and IGN said Dishonored 2 is Dishonored on steroids, and even if the game's story is predictable, the story the player creates is very memorable, respectively, and I think that's about as well as you can sum up the game. Downward Thrust especially is very insightful on the game, as he talks about how even lethal tools like the gun can be used non-lethally by wounding guards, opening them up for being knocked out. Patrician TV makes the point that the dual protagonists have limited the design space Arcane had to work with, as they could never assume that the player had access to a specific tool, which is a great observation and really made me think about how more frequent Walls of Light were in the first game. Most people focus on the mechanics and level design over the story, for obvious reasons, but I found it amusing that every video I watched had some different specific bones to pick with the story, aside from the general lackluster plot. I'd expect the discussion to be defined by a rigid juxtaposition between story and gameplay, but people seem to focus mostly on the positives, which is fair given just how good the mechanics are. The key aspects of Dishonored's setting, the Outsider, the Plague, and Chaos are all undermined in Dishonored 2 and its DLC. The wonderful dark tone which suffused and defined the original is no longer there. As much as I love Dishonored 2, the writers feel intent on sanding down its sharp edges. No mechanical design philosophy is better at portraying chaos than immersive simulation. I mean, what else can you call this but chaotic? The first game's writing leaned into the game design by calling the high combat playstyle what it was, high chaos, and the game invented metaphysics to excuse it. Non-lethally dealing with your targets wasn't the moral choice in Dishonored 1, but it is unequivocally so in Dishonored 2. So many of the conspirators are there by accident or without fully realizing what the conspiracy is actually trying to do that the game decides that they all deserve a second chance. I'm kind of dumbfounded by some of these, like, how can the game decide that the Crown Killer and the Duke deserve better than the Pendleton twins and the Lord Regent? Did the writers of Dishonored 2 not play Dishonored 1, or just not understand what it tried to do? By moving towards a more generic setting, increasingly filled with fantasy and sword and sorcery tropes like the evil magic user, the usurping relative, and the true heir to the throne, Dishonored 2 is drifting towards Dark Messiah. Dishonored 2 is great, but as much as I would be excited to play a Dishonored 3, so much of what made the original memorable is gone that a third game would have little left to build on. What is Dishonored without the Outsider? An incredible immersive sim to be sure, but one lacking its soul. With another conspiracy dismantled and Delilah banished to the void again, we finished the first season of Carluigi. I hope to make a wrap-up video about the videos I made this year for my next one, and I'll talk about what's next for the channel there. If you've seen any of my videos, thank you. I had a lot of fun making these, and while I do them for my sake, it's great to be able to share with others. Until next time.